school choice is the idea that's being promoted by a lot of people that claim to be in the liberty movement right now, where they would get vouchers to be able to take government money to go to any private school that they want to. Is this a good idea? On today's Defending Utah television program, I'm joined with Dr. Scott Bradley from Freedom's Rising Sun. Make sure you don't miss another one of our programs by clicking on that subscribe button and clicking on that bell to get notified. Also, help support this channel, support our efforts, and become a part of the solution by going to defendingutah.org and clicking on the Join tab and becoming a member today. Let's bring Dr. Bradley into the conversation. Dr. Bradley, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much. And you know, it's interesting to me how easily it seems many of us are co-opted into a bad path because there's free money, well, offered, so-called. And it's interesting to me, and I don't know, I don't want to get too far ahead of the curve of things, but we know from ancient scripture, if you will, the ancient record, that those that sought to control things and run things had seduced the more part of the righteous until they had come down to believe in their works and partake of their spoils. And you say, what? Oh, no, we'd never do something like that. But I would submit that most have been seduced and come to believe in the works and partake of the spoils. I would suggest that this bill we're going to be discussing is just an expansion of whatever they've already been seduced into, and might even start to think it's a great idea. So I don't know, maybe that's a bad introduction, but I think maybe people ought to listen up and find out how they've been seduced.
Well, and it's a twofold thing going on with this legislative session. And we're going to talk about a specific bill, but generally speaking, there's another bill that talks about just the idea of vouchers in the first place. And like you said, you're seduced into it because we feel like we're being taxed to death already. And I think I lost you, Scott. Let me know when I get your video back. There we go.
Let's try that.
So we feel like, we're already paying all these taxes. Let me just get some of it back and I can use it to spend anywhere. But the problem with that is what the government funds, the government controls, because when they give you back this voucher, that's not like they just gave you back your money and you get to spend it any way you want because it's your money. No, it's seen as it's treated as, and it basically, and when it actually breaks down to it, it is literally a welfare check, because for two reasons. Yes, we do pay taxes and that does go to schools, but these vouchers are actually are more than the average person pays in taxes. For example, in the state of Utah, the average household pays about $3,000 a year in income tax. And these vouchers would be for over $7,000 per student. So just even if you have only one child, you're getting more from the government than you put in. And so the idea that, in the state of Utah, we have about the average of 3 children. Some people have more. And so 7 times 3, that's much, much more that you're receiving as an unearned welfare check from the government, and is what the government funds, the government controls. And so if you think that you're just going to be able to take that money and go to your private school, that, eventually controls aren't going to come into play, I think we're fooling ourselves.
There's so many angles we could play on this to make the point, but your point should be well taken. We could start with the Communist Manifesto and the 10th point. We could go to the Humanist Manifestos and the free education things. Neither one of those concepts are friends of liberty, and yet we have largely adopted those things. When Utah's Constitution was written back in the 1890s, we had some socialists who were helping write that. Some people that were
well aware. It was forced upon us under duress. I find the state constitution to be a completely void document because it was under duress, but that's a side point.
Well, that's another story, but needs to be told, I'm sure, because literally duress means it was forcibly enacted upon us by threat by the federal government. It said, you can either come in under these conditions or you can't come in, and we'll end up crushing you. So, but be that as it may, the manifestos, the humanist and communist manifestos, both are heavily engaged in this free education thing. You say, well, everybody deserves an education. Well, the wrong education can absolutely destroy a nation, can destroy individuals. And your point about what they fund, they ultimately end up controlling. Now, some would say, oh, they're not going to do this. This bill would never allow that kind of thing. Well, the camel, the nose, and the tent, all these kind of images come to us.
It's funny you bring that up because, the nerd that I am, the other day I was reading a talk by a man, evil man by the name of Mariner Eccles. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, know who he is. He was the head of the Federal Reserve for a little while. Very prominent individual here in the state of Utah. And he gave a talk at BYU where he talked about the need for government funding of education. And he said this very thing that you brought up about, people say that the government will start to control your schools. And he poo-pooed that with the idea that that would never happen because we have so many congressmen representing their local communities. They would never give that up to the federal government, and 60 years, 70 years after the fact, we can laugh about it and say what a ridiculous statement that is, because we've seen that that's the case. But I think it proves your point that people say that they would never do that. It's laughable because they have done it and they will do it again.
Well, there's a track record that almost is unassailable to that outcome. In fact, even as a young kid, and I don't remember how we came up with the concept, but we had a little aphorism, if you will: you accept their nickel, you accept their noose. Mm-hmm. And again, I don't remember how we even noodled through that. But the fact is, if you take their money, you let them put a leash on you and they'll drag you where they want. And that's absolutely basically what has happened. Now, my family got into the homeschooling business kind of on the bleeding edge, honestly. It was both sides of my wife and I's family thought we were all going to, SWAT teams were going to come in, shoot us, and take our kids.
It was kind of around the time it was still illegal.
Yeah, well, they acted like it was, but
right.
But literally, a parent has the right to educate their child. But the fact of the matter is, there was some grave concerns by extended family members about that was what was going to happen to our family, and I got very heavily involved in the homeschool movement, and I spoke around the country at different conventions and so on. And actually, I found that the concept was more well received outside of Utah than it was within Utah. We have a very compliant kind of society here that says, oh, no,
well, and then there's the aspect that you and I have both talked about on this program before of during the 90s. That was one of the check marks that was done with the purge that was sent by Jepsen, a member of the 70, that said that told local stake presidencies and bishops that if a family was homeschooling, they should be brought in for possible disfellowship or excommunication. So in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So that's a very real,
conformance was expected. That's for sure.
Right. Exactly.
But in all of my travels over all of the years, and I don't travel and speak at homeschool conventions so much anymore, my opinion, they've become rather passé. But the fact of the matter is, I considered them to be a movement that had a great hope for this nation. I felt like we could raise a generation up that was not tainted by the Marxist philosophies and all of the other isms that are found in our public education system. And the kids would actually have a brain to think for themselves and not be told what to think. So anyway, I had a great deal of hope on that. But what I've found in recent years, literally, is that those that are homeschooling very often are co-opted into the system. Some government agencies say, oh, let us help you with this. We'll provide education materials. We'll do it online. We will have instructors that are certified. We will, basically you're going to get the party line. And I've become rather disappointed that there have been so many that have basically, the trolling line went by with the hook and the bait on it, and they grabbed it, and they're being reeled in right now. And basically what so many people that are doing homeschools, they say they're doing homeschool, is really a public education situation.
And it shouldn't be called public. It's government indoctrination. It's government education camps. And, you could even go as far as calling it government church, as far as I'm concerned. I think all of us need to start getting away from the idea of calling it public education, because it's anything but. If you're doing those government online schools, you're still being, you might as well be going to government
Indoctrinated.
school. Yeah, you're being
Well,
indoctrinated
and
still.
in fact, I've got a chapter in my book, To Preserve the Nation, in which I discuss the education and its relation to liberty. And I like to teach with compare and contrast kind of approaches. I look at how it was done at the beginning, decades of this nation, how it's done now, how it got co-opted into those kinds of situations.
Mhm.
It's kind of a generic review of those kind of things. But the point of the matter being that humanism, if people haven't read the humanist manifestos, they really do need to. They're just little tiny documents. If you can stomach them, you can get through them fairly quickly. There's one was in 1933, one in 1973, and one in 2003. But altogether, it's not much more than reading the Constitution. I mean, they're that small a document. So basically, they talk of themselves as religious humanists. Religious, it's a faith-based belief system.
Mhm.
There's no divine deity. There's only the belief in the wisdom of man and that kind of stuff. But the fact of the matter is, it's a violation of the idea that there shouldn't be a faith-based system that is tax supported. Okay.
Right.
And it's universally supported. Billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars go into this every year. Now, we don't want to get too far afield on maybe some of these things that we could have a lot of fun with. But the point of the matter is, with this particular
I want to get
bill,
the language of the bill. Yeah.
Yeah, the point of the matter with this is, hey, get your slice of the pie, everybody. And what is it, 331, I think.
Yep.
Where
I'll
they
share the screen with you now. This is
Okay.
sponsored by a liberal Salt Lake City representative from liberal Salt Lake City, and this is the Hope Scholarship Program, HB 331.
Well, it's about 1,100 lines, but
Yep.
a lot of it's existing code. But the fact of the matter is that they're establishing a new methodology by which people may apply to have government fund the education of their children. Again, you say, well, what's wrong with that? We're paying for it, blah, blah, blah. But the fact of the matter is that the education system of this nation is deteriorated tremendously because of government involvement. And I have read the entire bill, which I think is either in print, actually. But the fact of the matter is,
it provides $36 million for this welfare program.
Well, that's the first year, and then they take $35 million one-time funding, and then every year it's got a clause in it that says this will be perpetually funded. I mean, that's not the exact words, but
it's got a lot of new language. Look at all this new language. This is
absolutely, like I say,
hundreds of new lines.
There absolutely is, but it says no. We're not going to we got to take some one-time money. We got to take some other money out of this education fund, and we've got to continue this. And they actually put wording in there that talks about making certain that it gets funded again next year. And they have an inflation rider in there that says we'll add additional money every year to cover these inflationary processes. Well, the fact of the matter is, this is a perpetual drain on the economy. I mean, there's so many different reasons that this is bad. One of which, as we pointed out so far, is that we have been seduced into assuming that there's a right, a privilege, I'm going to get what's due me kind of attitude in so many ways. And we participated, and as you point out, in very many instances, in fact, the vast majority of instances where people participate, they will probably be drawing down other people's money. So we're redistributing money. It's another Marxist philosophy. So, this from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, that isn't in the Constitution. That's a Marxist philosophy that he promoted, so that what will happen is it's a redistribution of wealth. And that isn't the role.
It's a satanic doctrine.
It truly is. But if you even if you don't believe in Satan and you don't believe in God, think about this for a minute. If you go to the Declaration of Independence, it talks about the purpose of government is to secure God-given rights. And this is not a God-given right, and it's not securing that. What it's doing is taking from one and giving to another, or taking from many and
It's
giving it to one.
destroying somebody's God-given right
Absolutely.
to
And
control their own property.
Hamilton, in a couple of places in the Federalist Papers, spoke of power over a man's subsistence as a power of the man. And so if they're taking your hard-earned money and controlling that, they're controlling you. So not only are they going to control, I believe, ultimately and finally, what your child is being taught, or your grandchild, or whomever is involved with this thing. So they'll educate them into their new philosophy, if you will. And I could give you quotation after quotation after quotation about the philosophies that were planned many decades ago and are being implemented upon us even as we watch. And so, yeah, we're taking from
what you're saying though isn't crazy at all. It's actually it should be quite clear with who's backing this bill. I think we need to start getting into that aspect of this, because we have these big government institutions in the state of Utah, organizations that say that they're one thing, but then promote bills that are increasing government. We see here the organizations that are supporting this bill, and it's supposedly under the idea of providing school choice, and that every child should have the option to choose their educational needs. That's how it's being sold as. But we look at the organizations that are sponsoring this, and then we look at what's behind these things. Okay, this is what it's all being told about, this scholarship program. But what is it really about? Okay, that one of the major sponsors of this legislation is this organization called Excellent Ed. Okay, and you look at the their funding. Who are they getting funding from? And we're waiting for this. Hopefully it'll load for me. It was okay. It was loading earlier. Here we go. So let me just zoom in a little bit so you can kind of see what's going on. Who are the funders of this organization that is supporting this bill? The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, this organization that's pushing the vax, this organization that is pushing Common Core and, total, not just federal control of education, but global United Nations control of education. You have the Bloomberg, the direct, straight up communist that is supporting this organization that's pushing this bill. These guys are not about school choice. And we can go even further, where we go to this, you go to their website and you look at who they are. Let me just, you go to their about page, and it shows who's involved in this organization. Jeb Bush is their chairman. Just right there. We have NBC Universal and Telemundo representative is on their board. We have the chairman of the Florida State Board of Education, the chief policy and strategy officer of the New York Department of Education. These individuals are not going to be in favor of school choice. They're going to be in favor of making sure that every education institution, whether it's so-called private or public or charter, is teaching the same exact United Nations propaganda, no matter where it's at, so that because they're getting the funding. So we see the organizations that are behind this legislation. They're the ones that are behind Common Core. All the things that these parents that are supporting this type of legislation think that they're getting away from.
Well, that, I said years ago, I did a lot of speaking around the country in regards to these matters. And people were always saying, oh, if we could just get some of our tax dollars back. And we, a couple of things. One thing I found, that the effort to give a quality education doesn't cost anywhere near what the government programs are putting it forth in. Okay, so you can put out a quality program and use the same material in younger ages as well as your older kids as they come through. It's not a massive investment, but the fact of the matter is, I have never varied from this position, that I would never accept a government handout check, welfare check, as you call it. I would never to school my children for the things we've been talking about. There will be a compromise ultimately and finally, and it's wrong ultimately and finally when you talk about redistribution of wealth, when you talk it's Marxist origins, you talk about the humanist origins. And in spite of the benign wording that everybody tries to sell things with. Oh, just a little cancer's good. You'll enjoy this cancer, whatever.
Do you think these individuals would be supporting something that actually gave parents control over their education?
Absolutely not.
There's no way.
Absolutely not. And so the fact of the matter is, I mean, even decades ago, when I was involved in these kinds of things, there was talk about some kind of voucher system, no strings attached. You can get your own money back and you can school your kids, all those kinds of things we have found. And you just were reviewing some of the people that are involved in this thing. My gracious sakes alive, people, would you, if you found a toxic waste dump in your neighborhood, would you let your kids go play in it? And the answer is no. The mama bear and everybody would step in and say, I'm protecting my kids from this toxicity, from this polluted view of things. And I wish there were time. And you know, people will say, oh, you wasted too much time on the Humanist Manifestos. If you haven't read them, you need to read them. They remove God, family, and country from everything. They're preaching globalist concepts. They're bringing about a philosophy that'll undermine the family. They teach the mechanics of reproduction and nothing about fidelity and the value of you know, commitment for eternities, basically. All of those things are fostered. And if you haven't read those Humanist Manifestos, you need to, because they have become the de facto lesson manual of the education system that is currently indoctrinating our children. And if kids can't tell the difference between the moral character that they need and were taught early in the years in this nation, what we get is what we're getting today is unraveled. When I was young, we had school prayer, we had our cardinal sins, if you will, in school were having your shirt untucked and chewing gum and running in the hallways. Oh my goodness, what a but once we've removed these philosophies of character and nobility and purpose and have basically dumbed everything down to the point, we have teen pregnancies going through the ceiling. We have murders happening in schools. We have the idea that you can overthrow the great principles of proper government that we were granted at such great cost. Everything is being lost. And that's what I'm thinking. It's wrong from a theft perspective. We're being seduced into another program. We're allowing the cancer to spread into those kids that we actually want. You know, the parents say they want to save them from this, and yet they're going to be co-opted into it. I can't think of a value that is improved with this, and I can think of a whole bunch that are going to have just the legs chopped out from underneath them.
Absolutely. So the solution, really, we have to ask ourselves, what aren't we willing to sacrifice for our children? To not send your kid out to a babysitter 5 days a week for 9 months out of the year, that's going to be a sacrifice for some families that aren't used to that. But the blessing of doing so, I think we both can testify to that, is immeasurable. We're wondering, like you said, why are all these horrible things happening to society? Well, do we really think that we can compete with a system that indoctrinates our children into the religion of the state and of humanism and of statism and of literally Satanism, and for what is it, 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, 9 months a year, and we think, oh, we'll just go over the homework with them for an hour a night, and they'll go to church on Sunday, and that's gonna undo the brainwashing. It's foolish. It's self-deceiving. We should know better. If we don't, we're lying to ourselves if we think that 1 hour a night, if we do it, and that 2 or 3 hours on Sunday are going to undo what's being done all day long. They're going to ask you, well, if it's so evil, why are you sending me there every day? We're being hypocritical, and we're showing our children that we're not really willing to sacrifice the things that are necessary to make sure that everything that our child is taught is according to our own values. It's important that we do the sacrifice, that we don't just say, oh, but I'm being taxed for it anyways, that we do what's necessary to be able to take full and total control over the raising of our children in every measurable way.
As an illustration of that point, the beginning of one year, I had a new class of Sunday school kids to teach. And I asked them in the class, and these were high school juniors and seniors, basically. I said, how many hours a week do you spend in school? Now, you talk about the 6 hours. That's not the end of it. There's the homework aspect of things. And so anyway, the kids, and I don't know if any of them were telling me the truth, but I took their spectrum. It varied from 40 hours a week to 70 hours a week across the whole spectrum. Now, I says, let's take the low end of that. Let's just say 45 for ease of figuring. So if you have 45 hours a week focused on the educational system, or the indoctrination system, as some of us would prefer to call it, I didn't try and taint the well, if you will, by my discussion. But I said, let's say you're spending 45 hours a week in your program in school. I says, from today through the end of the year, when you take out the days when we don't have Sunday school, where you have an Easter program or a Christmas program or something, you have conferences or whatever. I said, we have a total in an entire year on this subject of 17 hours that I will be able to. Now, my enthusiasm for the topic was overwhelming. I just absolutely was delighted in the topic. However, I said, that's about 1/3 of what you get each week. And I've got 1 year to go through 17 hours at 50 minutes a session that we're going to talk about these things. And I said, you've got to do something beyond come in this class and warm a seat. You're going to have to focus and energize yourself. That doesn't happen in most homes. Right. And so if you stop and think about it, if you have 17 hours of countering production, if you will, what is being fed to the kids at 3 times that rate in 1 week, let alone in 1 year, you can see how hopelessly overwhelmed the program is. Now, again, I'm absolutely convinced that the homeschool program that we implemented with our children is really a sacred path to light and knowledge and truth. And I'm absolutely convinced that what the public education system, so-called, is offering is a path that will divert the children's attention. And we see this in the faith crises most of our children are having. Let me just give you a little quotation here, Ben, that this is in my book. It's by William Foster, who was the head of the Communist Party USA. He wrote this back in the 1930s. This is their view of what they would do to the education program. He said the schools, colleges, and universities will be coordinated and grouped under the National Department of Education. There we go. And its state and local branches. The studies will be revolutionized, being cleansed of religious, patriotic, and other features of the bourgeois ideology. The students will be taught on the basis of Marxian dialectical materialism, internationalism, and the general ethics of the new socialist society. Present obsolete methods of teaching will be superseded by a scientific pedagogy. Now, that's a teaching method. So here we have, out of their lying lips, if you will, the program that they have had in mind since before I was born. And I watched it metastasize over the years when I was in school. I saw it change dramatically. And today it's almost impossible to even pick a few points out of the so-called education system that were there in just massive abundance, even when I was a child. But that's where we are in America. And I'm concerned that we're being seduced away. We're money's the bait. The ease of the program is there. And we're saying, oh, we can turn our kids over to these guys. They'll do great. And pretty soon we've accepted their nickel, we've accepted their noose, and we're being drawn down the path. So I think
there's no shortcut. We can't look. We're like, how do we get the government to solve this problem? They're not going to solve it. That's the problem. is we're looking to the wrong place for a solution. The solution for our family is our family.
Well, I mean, you know what? Can you imagine? God designed this program that included a family setting in which correct principles were taught so that the concepts that were most important would be emphasized. Now, of course, if you look at the national level and even at the state level with some of the people that are in high office in the state, their interest is in unseating the values, attitudes, and beliefs of the parents or the grandparents. I mean, I fear nowadays that even the grandparents are somewhat tainted by the fact that the program has been implemented over the years. See, the humanist manifestos, as we inferred, they became vogue, if you will, beginning in 1933. Now, there were others before that went. I mean, you know, the John Dewey guy, who is considered the father of modern education, was dinking around with, if you will, America's education system long before 1933. But that's when it started to gain a foothold. So all I would say is, people, don't sell your souls. Don't get this new bill that has the promise of money being poured on your bodies. Don't be trapped by that. Don't give your kids away. The price is way too high.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dr. Bradley. I think what we'll do is we'll wrap this up and encourage people. We'll have the link to the bill and a link to be able to discover who your legislator is, so you can reach out to them. And after reading the bill, you can tell them how you feel about the legislation. And that'll be all in the description, as well as a link to your website, Freedom's Rising Sun. Dr. Bradley, thank you so much for joining us. And if you want to make sure you don't miss a program, you click on that subscribe button, you click on the bell to get notified. And again, encourage you to support this channel, support our efforts, and become a part of the solution. Receive those benefits of membership by going to defendingutah.org and clicking on the Join tab. I'm Ben McClintock from defendingutah.org, and I'll see you next time.